In the small, devout village of Ijebuode, nestled in the heart of Nigeria, Pastor Elizabeth, Liz Adebayo stood as a figure of reverence and awe. Known for her fiery sermons that could ignite the soul and her apparent dedication to the upliftment of the community, she had single-handedly built the light of truth from the ground up. Clothed in elegant robes, Liz was a vision of piety, her voice a soothing balm to the weary souls of her congregation. Liz was not merely a spiritual leader. She was a beacon of hope for the young and the vulnerable. Her promise was simple yet profoundly transformative. Serve in the church choir, and your education would be taken care of. This promise alone had swelled the ranks of her choir with bright, eager young faces, all dreaming of university life beyond their modest beginnings. However, beneath this veneer of sanctity, Liz harbored a dark secret. She was intersex, a condition she kept hidden, believing it to be both her burden and her power. This secret, coupled with her position, allowed her to manipulate and control those around her. Her relationships with the choristers were far from holy. They were calculated, filled with coercion and threats. One evening, after a particularly stirring service where the spirit seemed to fill the church, Liz invited Titi, a young, ambitious female chorister, to her private quarters under the guise of a blessing session. The promise of spiritual enrichment was a mask for Liz's true intentions. Titi, naive and trusting, followed Liz into her private sanctuary, expecting guidance or perhaps a prayer. Instead, she found herself in a scenario far from her expectations. The room was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of incense, creating an intimate, sacred atmosphere. Liz began with prayers, her voice low and comforting, but soon her actions diverged from the holy. In the privacy of her quarters, Liz's hands wandered under the pretext of a spiritual connection, crossing boundaries that Titi had not consented to. Her touch was not of a pastor seeking to bless, but of someone exploiting her position. When Titi, shocked and confused, attempted to pull away, Liz's tone changed from gentle to commanding. "You want to go to university, don't you, Titi?" Liz whispered, her voice now laced with an edge of threat. "This is part of your journey. Keep silent, and your dreams will be fulfilled. Speak of this, and I will ensure you never see the inside of a classroom again." Titi, overwhelmed and frightened, complied under the weight of Liz's promises and threats. The encounter was not just physical, but a psychological manipulation, leaving Titi bound by fear to silence. This was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern where Liz used her sacred role to ensnare those she deemed vulnerable, manipulating their dreams and futures for her own desires. Titi left that night with the heavy burden of secrecy, her innocence tainted by the one she had looked up to as a spiritual guide. Thus, Liz continued to be seen as a paragon of virtue in public, while in the shadows she exploited her power, weaving a web of deceit and control over the young lives she was supposed to shepherd. As Pastor Elizabeth Liz Adebayo's influence over the village of Ijebuode expanded, so did the complexity of her manipulations. Her charisma and the apparent miracles of her ministry had woven her into the very fabric of the community, but this came with a dark undercurrent. Her encounters extended far beyond Titi. She had systematically entangled both male and female choristers in a web of deceit and coercion. Each young member of her choir was silenced not by loyalty, but by fear, their dreams of education used as bait to ensure their compliance. Yet, as Liz indulged deeper into her corruption, her position became increasingly precarious, like a house built on sand. David, a young man with a keen interest in engineering, found himself at a critical juncture. He was one of the brightest in the choir, his dedication to his faith and his craft known to all. His dreams were of studying at one of Nigeria's top universities, but his family's financial situation made this seem like a distant fantasy. Liz had noticed his ambition and talent, and under the guise of mentorship, she drew him closer to her inner circle. One evening, after a particularly uplifting choir rehearsal where David had shone, Liz invited him to her office. The room was bathed in the soft, flickering light of candles, creating an ambience that was meant to be comforting, almost sacred. Liz began by praising David's contributions, her voice smooth and encouraging. She spoke of scholarships, opportunities, and a future in engineering that seemed within reach. However, the conversation took a dark turn as Liz's hand rested on his shoulder, then moved with an intimacy that was wholly inappropriate. David, caught off guard, felt the warmth of her touch become an unwelcome intrusion. Her words, once inspiring, now carried a chilling undertone. "I can make your dreams come true, David," she whispered, her voice soft but her intent clear. "But remember, silence is your key. Speak of this, and I'll ensure you never see the inside of a lecture hall. I'll destroy everything you hold dear." The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Liz had linked his future not to his talent or hard work, but to his silence about her actions. David left her office that night with a turmoil of emotions. His dreams, once a source of motivation, now felt like hostages to Liz's secret. Each choir practice became a double-edged sword. He sang for God, but also for his survival, his voice a tool to keep the peace. The choir, which had been a place of divine harmony, now felt like a cage of secrets. Every note sung was a reminder of his entrapment. David saw the same fear in the eyes of others around him, those like Priska, Elle, and Titi, each bound by similar threats and promises. As Liz's control over the community tightened, so did the risk of her secrets unraveling. Every chorister was a thread that, if pulled, could lead to her downfall. The village's faith in Liz was unwavering, but beneath that faith, a quiet storm was brewing. Her manipulations, once hidden in the shadows, were becoming more visible as the weight of her secrets grew. The more she controlled, the more vulnerable she became to exposure, with each young chorister potentially the one to bring her house of cards tumbling down. The community's faith in Pastor Liz was as solid as the church's walls until one fateful Sunday. The church was packed, the air thick with incense and hymns, when Liz was about to speak. Suddenly, a commotion broke the silence as Titi, a young woman under Liz's mentorship, stormed in, disheveled and determined. "Stop this charade. This woman is a wolf in sheep's clothing," she shouted, revealing Liz's secret manipulations, the promise of education exchanged for silence and compliance. Liz tried to maintain control, dismissing the accusations as the devil's work, but her words fell flat. Then other choristers, including David, Priska, and Elle, confirmed Titi's story, each adding their own experiences of coercion and abuse. The atmosphere shifted from reverence to outrage. Shouts replaced hymns, demanding justice and truth. Liz's image of piety crumbled as the truth about the light of truth came to light, igniting a firestorm that would shape the church's and community's future. The truth about Pastor Elizabeth Liz Adebayo spread through Ojibwe like an unstoppable blaze, swiftly revealing her true, corrupt nature to all. Titi's courageous public confrontation during the church service was the spark that ignited this wildfire of revelation, but she was merely the beginning. One by one, others from the choir stepped forward, their voices joining in a chorus of betrayal and pain. David recounted his moment of realization, how Liz's promises of education had turned into silent threats, manipulating his dreams for her own desires. His story resonated with many, urging more to speak out. Priska, with a mix of relief and sorrow, shared her experiences, detailing how Liz had twisted her spiritual guidance into something unholy, using Priska's aspirations as leverage for compliance. Her confession was a catharsis, a release of years of pent-up fear. Elle, known for his drumming talent and ambition, spoke of how his dreams were held hostage by Liz's demands, his story adding to the growing list of grievances against her. Each new accusation from the choir members was like another log thrown onto the fire of truth, burning away the facade of righteousness Liz had built. The village, which had once held Liz in high esteem, now saw her through the lens of her victims' stories. She was no longer a spiritual leader but a figure of scorn, her home now a place of gathering not for prayer but for justice. The revelations were discussed in every corner of Ojibwe, from the market to the quietest homes, altering the community's perception of faith and leadership. The fallout was immediate. Calls for accountability echoed through the village. Some demanded legal action. Others pondered how to rebuild their faith and community after such a profound betrayal. The once united front of support for Liz disintegrated, replaced by a community grappling with how to move forward. This chapter of truth had not only unmasked Liz, but had also begun a process of communal healing, as the voices of those who had been wronged now sought to find light in the darkness, hoping to forge a new path toward genuine faith and truth. Anger fueled the villagers, leading to Liz being paraded through the village. The procession was one of both humiliation and vindication for those she had wronged. Yet, amidst the chaos, questions about faith, forgiveness, and justice swirled in the minds of many. In the wake of Pastor Liz's exposure, the light of truth, church was left in disarray, its members deeply divided. Some were determined to rebuild, aiming to restore the church's sanctity with transparent and accountable leadership. Others, feeling betrayed, considered leaving the faith, seeking spiritual solace elsewhere or in solitude. The young choristers, now free from Liz's control, faced a challenging future. David, Priska, Ade, Titi, and others had to navigate their educational dreams with the scars of their past. David contemplated new ways to fund his engineering ambitions. Priska turned to therapy and singing for healing, and Ade decided to work and save for his studies. The choir itself became a pillar of support, transforming from a place of manipulation to one of recovery and empowerment as they worked to heal and redefine their faith. In the aftermath of the scandal that had torn through the fabric of Ijebuode, Liz found herself at a crossroads. The weight of her past actions, the manipulation, and the abuse of her position as a pastor weighed heavily on her soul. Liz knew that the path to redemption would not be easy, nor would it be swift, but she was determined to walk it. Her first act of repentance was direct and personal. She sought out each of the choristers she had wronged, starting with Titi, the young woman whose courage had brought Liz's secrets into the light. With humility and tears, Liz begged for forgiveness, not expecting it but offering her apologies with genuine remorse. She spoke to David, Priska, Ade, and others, acknowledging the harm she had caused, the dreams she had manipulated, and the trust she had shattered. Her apologies were not just words. They were laden with the intent to make amends. Finding a job outside the church was a significant step for Liz. She chose a role in community education, working at a local school where she could contribute to the futures of young people without the shadow of her past authority. Her work was now about empowerment through education, a stark contrast to her previous manipulation. Liz found purpose in teaching basic literacy to adults in the evenings, helping children with their homework, and organizing community drives for educational materials. Over time, Liz's life transformed into one of simplicity and service. She lived in a modest home, far removed from the grandeur of her former life as a pastor. Her days were spent in quiet acts of kindness, her nights in reflection and perhaps in private prayer, seeking peace for her soul. The community's response was varied. Some could never forgive, their wounds too deep, their faith in the institution of the church too shaken. However, there were those who saw the sincerity in her change. They observed how she no longer sought to lead but to serve, how she had turned her life around without seeking glory. Slowly, some in the community began to accept her, not as the revered Pastor Liz, but as Elizabeth, a woman who had learned from her grave mistakes. Her happiness was not in the public eye or in regaining her former status, but in the small, everyday moments where she could see the direct impact of her work. Seeing a child's face light up with understanding, hearing thanks from an adult who could now read to their own children. These were her new sermons, her new blessings. Liz's journey to redemption was long and fraught with challenges, but it led to a humble, happy life. She found joy not in power or recognition, but in the quiet, steady work of making amends and contributing positively to the community she had once harmed. Her story became one of caution and hope, a testament to the possibility of change, even when one's fall from grace seems irrevocable.